Hi, folks, and welcome to Lehigh Valley Time Travelers. I'm Grover Silcox.
Mark Ian-Petro here.
Two history buffs, or people who love history, who like to go and visit the people, places, and things that are significant in the more than 280-year history of the Lehigh Valley. And also,
Well, and how many people recognize the fact that our history, our local history, every now and again becomes intertwined with our national history, and of course our 250th birthday as a nation is coming up. And I find it fascinating, I know you do, the various connections between places, things, today, people,
yes,
between the two.
right, because today we're going to visit a gentleman who played a significant role in the American Revolution. And
He
yet,
certainly did.
how many people know his name?
Right. The name, just not to keep you guessing too long, is George Taylor. And we all know that the Declaration of Independence, arguably the most important document in history,
Absolutely.
was witnessed and signed by 56 men,
Right.
individuals. And those men were, among others, they were lawyers and merchants and businessmen. They were movers and shakers. They were
Right. Influential
they were
people.
proper
They would be called influencers.
doctors,
today.
ministers, property owners,
Right.
printers, and one iron master. And that's the topic that we're exploring today on Lehigh Valley Time Travelers, George
Right.
Taylor.
Yeah, an iron master. And an iron master was a person who knew how to manufacture products from iron, and I think usually would have a vested interest, be part owner of a foundry or a foundry operation. Lots of times they would lease a foundry and operate their business that way.
There would be no industrial revolution. Well, it's not likely there would be an industrial revolution, which occurred around the middle of the 19th century, without the metals industry, an integrated metals industry where all of the materials were gathered, and like magic, they conjured up iron,
Yes.
zinc, eventually steel.
Right.
And what built the country, what built the nation, what built the world during the Industrial Revolution? Well, steel, iron and steel was right at the middle, right
Correct.
at the heart of it.
And I would think most folks think, of Bethlehem Steel, but steel, iron making, metal making preceded the creation of Bethlehem Steel.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was built upon those generations of foundries that came, before it, obviously.
Yeah, European contribution was very great. John Fritz, of course, but the people who understood how to create metal. But the reason Bethlehem and the Lehigh Valley was so integral to that was the abundance of a product that was
Right.
so
the
important.
raw materials were here.
You couldn't run a furnace without fuel, and after they realized that it wasn't going to work with wood, timber, the discovery of hard coal, anthracite, just to the north, opened up the doors and made the Lehigh Valley what it would become for the next 150 years.
Right. And then that led from one thing to another, from
Yep.
that to the railroads, to the steel, and so on and so
Right.
forth. But going back to George Taylor now, his story is fascinating. Talk about time travelers. This fellow was one of the few immigrants who signed the Declaration of Independence.
A lot of people don't know that George was an immigrant. He was
Yes.
from what we now call, or they call, Northern Ireland.
Right.
But he was from the northern part of Ireland.
And his father evidently was a Protestant minister.
Mm-hmm.
So he had sort of that background coming over here. And he came over here, he signed up as an indentured servant, which was, define that for us, Mark.
In those days, that was an agreement that basically meant that someone would support you, because the assumption was you're coming over here with nothing.
Right.
And what did you have to offer other than your labor yourself.
Right.
Now, the difference between a slave and an indentured servant is considerable, even though they're like
Correct.
cousins. You'd rather be an indentured
Well, you
servant.
sign up for being an indentured servant.
There was an escape clause, though.
Yeah.
You could develop and become George Taylor
Right.
if you were
Right.
a person of color. There was
That
no
wasn't
escape.
the case. No.
Right.
As an indentured servant, the relationship was that this person who was going to contract you,
He
as
was
an
like a
indentured servant,
mentor.
was a mentor.
A
He was going to
mentor.
teach you a
Right.
trade, a profession, a skill,
Right.
and he would pay your room and board. You would work for no wages, typically.
Right.
And then the servitude would last a certain period of time, and then you were free to move on and use the skills
Right.
that you learned.
Exactly.
And that's what George did.
That's what it was, and he took it all the way. He really
Yes,
did.
a Samuel Savage Jr., who was an ironmaster in just outside of Philadelphia, one of the forges. He was the individual who George Taylor, signed the contract with.
Right.
And so he comes over, and at first he's shoveling coal into the forge, right?
Yes.
That's how he starts,
Starting at the bottom.
at the bottom.
Right.
And they soon discover that this guy has got a little education, right? And so as things evolve very quickly,
They recognize his aptitude.
yeah, he moves from shoveling coal and whatever else he was doing to working in-house with the books, the accounting books.
Mhm.
And so he learned to be an ironmaster and to also be a businessman.
You know, and we're talking about the 18th century, taking that a little further along into the 19th century, that was the story of Andrew Carnegie.
Mhm.
That was the story of Charles M. Schwab of Bethlehem.
Right, Bethlehem Steel.
But they took poor boys, but it had evolved from indentured servitude to apprenticeship.
Correct.
You became an apprentice. You learned a trade or a skill.
Right.
And the beauty of America was the opportunity was there for some people,
Right.
depending on your skin color,
Right.
to go as far and as high as you could go. And each of these people we just mentioned were like that.
Right. And so in this unbelievable story of rags to riches, the owner of the foundry, of the operation, dies, and George marries his widow.
Yes. How fortuitous.
Yes.
We're not going to go anywhere there.
No, yeah, right. Well, they didn't have dating services in those days, from what I understand.
No, but it's all about opportunity
Yes.
and being in the right place at the right
Right.
time. And
Well,
I guess
evidently,
that applies.
it worked. I mean, the marriage was solid. So, yeah. So George then takes over the operation until the owner's son reaches maturity, and then he takes it over. I guess that's how it worked. But then
yeah.
George was set up to move on to, become an ironmaster with other operations.
And succeed he did.
Yeah, he did. And so now he's a businessman. He comes to Easton, and he purchases a particular business
Mm-hmm.
that has already been in operation, the Bachman Public House.
It's a charming.
Greystone,
Last-
Georgian style. I
Last
think they
time we
call it.
talked about the Sun Inn and the look of that building. This one's very similar, but that's the way they built buildings back then.
Right.
Very sturdy looking, and right at a prominent corner in downtown Easton. And I'm happy to say, it's still there.
Still there,
Yep.
still standing solid
Right.
after all these years, centuries, really.
Mhm.
And it was originally built in 1753 by Jacob and Katrina Bachman.
Right.
And somehow they vanish at a certain point,
Well, they were
leaving only their name behind.
well, they were foreclosed.
Oh, that's right. It was foreclosed.
I mean, it
because
happened.
that's how George bought it in the
Yeah,
sheriff's sale.
yes. It's again another opportunity.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
was a guy who the
Ah,
opportunities came his way. It was really miraculous,
Well-
but he was also ready.
yeah, right.
when the
Opportunity knocks, but you have to be there to open the door.
open the door, right?
Yeah, he's as we look at people in our people, places, and things as we travel through time here. That's a common denominator among successful people. Even today, it's true.
Yes,
It's true.
absolutely.
In your own life, you probably know that.
And almost every success. I mean, well, I don't know what the number of people, but many successful people will say, it was luck, but
You make your own luck sometimes.
I was working at it.
Well, Jacob and
I knew what to do
Katrina
when it came my way.
might not have had the good fortune or the business sense
Right.
to operate successfully, and there were sheriff sales even back then,
Evidently,
and
Yeah.
they were in foreclosure. And give George credit for recognizing an opportunity. And why was a public house or any such building important?
it was more than a place to eat and stay. It was a place to meet, and in particular, on the second floor, they had a very large room they used as the first courthouse in Northampton County.
Yeah,
Until they moved it. I
to
don't
center
have
to
the
Center
date,
Circle,
to Center Square. Yeah, Mhm.
and then eventually to it's where it is now.
right.
Um,
In fact, Benjamin Franklin chronicles his visits to the court at Northampton, which would have been at the Bachman Public House.
there you go.
So that was in addition to other people who stayed there. I believe Washington and
I don't know where he didn't stay.
yeah, he stayed everywhere.
Holiday Inn.
I mean, probably. But the Bachman Public House, which is
Second in Northampton.
second in Northampton,
Yep.
available, for visits, and they have different activities that go in there. I think they have the Bachman Players, sort of a
think-
theatrical troupe
Yeah.
there, and so it you go in and you can see there's the huge hearth there, the
Mhm.
kitchen.
Mhm.
Um,
It was the heart of the community.
it was,
and-
and it
and-
was the postal
Facility.
office. Yeah, it was the post office
Yeah.
for the county.
Right, that's where you could go to hear the latest news and gossip.
Right.
I mean, it was a clearinghouse. Almost every sizable town had a place like that.
Right.
And in those days, Easton, that was before Easton was officially a city. I don't even know if maybe it was a borough or maybe only a village. I'm not sure, but that it's easy to travel back and imagine that at that point in time, in that part of that century,
Right.
that was Easton.
Oh yes.
Everything kind of revolved around a location like that.
Right.
Right.
And in the Bachman Public House, there's Taylor had a private bedchamber. They called it. That's where he stayed when he came to Easton.
Mhm.
And there's the hearth room with a large fireplace for cooking meals, which folks can see even today. And one can imagine in the 1760s, the talk in the tavern was, at least leading up to the Revolution, was very anti-George, King George, right? I believe they have a portrait of King George turned upside down, which was expressed or reflected their attitude toward
He was reviled.
Monarchy.
He was reviled by the people over here.
and certain patriots met at the Bachman to plan strategies. And also during the French and Indian War, which was in the 1760s, I believe, early 1760s, the colonialists met with various Native Americans to win them over to join the British effort against the French and Indians, other Indians, of course.
Yeah.
So it had a lot. It played so many different roles.
Well, here's something interesting, though. I think if you learn your history out of sequence or inside out or whatever, you probably read or learned that one of the first public readings of our Declaration of Independence in the colonies
Right.
was in Easton.
Right.
Okay? And now you know why. Why Easton? Why, of all the places, why Easton? Well, because one of the signers
Yes.
was an Eastonian.
Right.
That's why.
Right. Yeah, July 8th, I believe it was. They read it in
Yeah, 4 days after.
Philadelphia,
Mhm.
Easton, and Trenton.
Right.
Those three cities.
But those were two more prominent
You're
locations.
very right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So why Easton? If you ever wondered why, that's
Yeah.
probably the main reason, because
Right.
one of the signers was located in Easton.
Right. And the courthouse steps that they read it was right at center circle there.
Circle.
And of course George was in the crowd, I'm sure.
Yeah, proud.
Very proudly, yes. And so George bought some property in what is now Catasauqua.
Bury's Bridge.
There you go. And he built himself a mansion,
Yes.
particularly for his wife, Anne.
It was absolutely palatial. Beautiful, beautiful. But there's a sad story
There
connected
is a
to
sad
it.
story to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. He bought it for Anne, especially for her. He
Mhm.
built it and so forth. And then shortly after it was built, Anne died.
Yeah.
And so he only lived there for a short time, a few
Yeah.
years after that.
Yeah, he built it for her, and
Right.
it lost its meaning to him, really.
It did, yeah.
But he had another house.
He did. Well, he rented a room or rooms at the Parsons house in Easton.
Hmm.
And I think that was the last place he lived before he died.
Mhm.
And that house is now open for
Visits.
visits.
Yeah.
And also, of course, the mansion in Catasauqua.
All three, the public house, the mansion, and the more modest home, they're all still standing, and they're beautiful examples of architecture from the period. And it's so gratifying that, there are modern buildings going up around them in Easton
Right.
or in other areas, but the respect we show by retaining those older buildings that's a great gift that we give to our children or our grandchildren.
Right.
So anything that's existed that long deserves that kind of respect.
Exactly.
Yep.
And the story and the life of George Taylor should serve as inspiration, as so many of these stories do, for all of us, because he was an immigrant. He started with nothing.
Yeah, it was kind of a rags to riches story if you think
Yeah.
about it.
And then he also, as so many others did, once they became successful, they became important to the community. They became active. His first government role was as Justice of the Peace in Northampton County.
Hmm.
And then he went on to become elected to the Pennsylvania Assembly and then the Second Continental Congress.
And he took up arms. He was a member of the militia, I
He was a
think.
colonel in the Pennsylvania militia.
Yes, he was. And a delegate
During
to
the
the
Revolution.
To the Continental Convention.
Right. And the other thing is that he was still operating a foundry. It was the Durham Foundry. He secured a contract for the foundry through the Continental Congress
Right.
and was the first company or business to provide munitions for the Continental Army. He provided some 250 cannonballs
Hmm.
weighing between whatever it was, 16 and 20 pounds for the Continental Army.
So he was an immigrant, but the concept of a democracy, of a free country, self-governed, he was all in.
He was all in.
Like all the
Right.
other early patriots and founding fathers. Some were born in America,
Right.
but some like him were immigrants.
Yeah, exactly.
Fascinating story.
And the other interesting thing is that he was a replacement for John Dickinson, who was a loyalist in terms of signing the Declaration. He replaced him because he refused to do it. And
Signing that document took courage. And if anybody wonders what was so courageous, putting your name on that document
right,
put a bullseye on you.
yes, it was treason.
Oh
in
my
terms-
goodness! From the moment
from
you,
the point of view of the
yeah,
British
what
government,
what you might have been thinking was one thing,
right?
or whispering about at the
Right.
Bachman house,
Yes,
but once you put your signature on that, you could be signing your death warrant.
absolutely.
So
But
it
was
took a
Ben-
lot of courage.
It did. I think it was Ben Franklin who said to his fellow signers, we either we all hang together or we hang separately.
Yes,
And I think that really
it was
expressed it.
it was a gambit, but it worked out,
It certainly did.
and we're lucky for it.
We
really
are. And then George, as I mentioned, he was living in the Parsons house in Easton when he died. He was renting a room there.
1780, 81 or so, I think, just so people know.
Yeah, 1781.
He was a very accomplished man. He led a varied life,
Right.
an exciting life.
And you
actually.
can learn more about it by going on tour at the George Taylor House in Catasauqua,
Mhm.
Which is an historic site,
Yes.
open to the public,
Yes, it is.
and the Bachman Public House, and the Parsons House in Easton, both in those two in Easton.
And I hope we've shed some light on a
Yeah.
very important member of our past, and also sparked an interest in visiting some of these sites because
Yes.
they're here and
Right.
they're here to entertain and educate.
Right. And I believe, and I think you pointed this out in a previous video, that the first monument to a signer was George in the Easton Cemetery.
In the beautiful Easton Cemetery.
Yes.
Yep.
He was originally buried in the cemetery at the Lutheran Church, St. John's, I think it is.
Yeah.
And then later reinterred to the Easton Cemetery, where his monument stands.
to this day.
Yeah. So, 3 cheers for George Taylor.
Well, I would lift a glass to
Yeah, I would too, and say huzzah.
Huzzah, yes.
We have a lot more travels to do. There's a lot more history to tell.
More people, places,
More
and things to
people,
go.
places, and things, and we're off to see them all. So, Mark, and for me, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.
Look
We'll
for
see
us
you next time. Don't go anywhere
without
without
us.
us.